Welcome back to Analysis. In the first part of the programme, we looked at claims by one imam that Christianity had lost its way. In this part, we'll be looking at the wider issue of faith in Britain and the future of religion. My guests from the first half of the programme are remaining with me. Alan Green, both Bob in the first part and at the end of the first part, Sheikh Hatem Al-Haddad was saying, look, say what you like, there is a decline in Christianity. Now, should that be a problem?
Yes, of course it's a problem. It's a complex problem, though, with very complex reasons. I think part of it is that traditionally the people of this country have not been overly religious. I think that has been the nature of the church here. Not very demonstrative, not very as full of the religiosity that you see on the continent, for example. That's one part of it. The other is that it was so wedded to the state in a way that it still, we have bishops in the House of Parliament, but you no longer have to go to church in order to show that you are a responsible member of society. I think that's a good change.
Not legally enforceable, as it was at one time.
Indeed. And that's a good change. And with that change has gone a whole understanding of the role of the church. I mean, its colonial role, its role of being at the top table with the leaders of the local community. And we have not, I certainly find that within the Church of England, that we haven't sufficiently changed our language to reflect that change. The hymns we sing, some of the prayers we use, simply reflect that sort of organisation. And that's not where I feel I am within my local community. And those assumptions are then maintained outside as well. The individuals who are most unhappy with me and berate me for being a clergyman tend not to wait to ask me what it is I believe in or what it is I do. They simply tell me the assumptions that they have that are wrong. And by and large, those assumptions are not things that I either believe in or do. I'm not part of that Victorian church. I am really interested in how the church now reflects its traditions, which are not traditions of being at the top table of government, but traditions of following Jesus and the sort of way that he presented himself within his society, and how we now interpret that and live up to that in the age in which we find ourselves. So that is, on the one hand, looking at our own traditions and working through those. The other side is finding the ways to allow modern society to challenge us and to bring those issues into the church.
Well, I'll come back, but Bob, let me just get a response from you about those points, because I mean, if I hope I won't mis-summarise what you've said here, but what Alan Green seems to be saying there is, look, I stand for a kind of disestablished church, whether or not it formally remains established. My vision of it is a kind of step. It's no longer the Tory party at prayer. It's no longer linked to the state in that way, at least in my practice. It's a kind of almost a gathered church on the old model. What's wrong with that? It's an expression of people's elementary freedom to be able to gather and worship as they like.
Sure. Alan's just mentioned that there are certain sort of assumptions that get made just because of the dog collar and the role, I guess. And I think that's often true for me as an atheist or a humanist speaking on panels as well, is that you've assumed, I think, there's something wrong with a gathered church and people. Actually, freedom of religion or belief is at the centre of the work that the International Humanist and Ethical Union does as a policy organisation, and we absolutely represent and reflect the fact that freedom of religion is literally the same human right as freedom of thought and freedom of belief. And so that's very central to us. So there's no sense in which I want to quash or eradicate churches and people coming together and their freedom of worship and their freedom of association. So that would be an assumption that should be rejected. I think, but it is interesting. I mean, it is that wider church hierarchy that is part of the established church in the country, and I mean that is a problem, and many people don't see it as a huge problem. But You mentioned that there are 26 bishops in the House of Lords, and they have some influence. There are rules again, about how they're treated. They're treated differently from other members of the House of Lords. They get stood up to when they speak and listened to in a particular way. So they're very influential, in fact, and we've seen that change the way that law is formed in this country many times. So we're talking about a select single denomination from one religion in a country where very small numbers overall actually go to church and sort of are affiliated with the church in a close way. Lots of people put Christian on the census, but it's a declining number. The number that are actually involved in the church is very small. And yet we have this one select group of people given a position as of a right in our highest seat of government just because they're bishops, which also means they're only male.
Okay. Well, let me just stop you there, because
that's a problem.
Let me get George take on. Do you think? I mean, again, I don't want to put words in Alan's mouth, but he seemed to be suggesting that the church would be stronger if it didn't have this kind of overt political role, or that he sees it as not really. Is that
a political role? But
well, sitting in the House of Lords is a political role.
Well, no, because to be political, there need to be a political party, and you've got to do. If you tried to get 2 of any 26 of those bishops to agree on anything, then you'd have a bit of a challenge. But they're not a political party, no. But they do sit there.
No, but just let me stop you there. But to be involved in politics, you don't need to be in a political party. But most people would think if you're in the reforming Senate of the government in this country, you're playing a political role.
All right, but well, let's leave that. We'll argue about that in the pub afterwards, John. But but what we're talking about here is establishment, disestablishment, and I wouldn't die in a ditch to have an established church. In fact, actually, I think probably on balance, I'd rather favour a church that was a thorn in the side of the state than one that's coextending with the state. Actually, that would probably be my call. But what I would like is that debate to be had properly, rather in the way that I would have liked the debate about gay marriage to have been had properly. And I think a lot of people in the church were antagonistic about the way in which that debate was being conducted, rather than actually the essence of the argument itself. It was just a very shabby bit of deconstructing, and a lot of that shabbiness is attached to. I mean, I've only just met him, and I don't want to be rude about him, but Bobby, you get frightfully muddled. I mean, in the first half, you're talking about the rules and regulations of religion getting in the way of a good, pure, progressive, secularist state, but the rules and regulations actually come from the secular state. The secular state is where the judiciary is. That's where all the rules and regulations of society are established, including many of those that are attached to marriage. And then when it comes to something like marriage, the secular state start going, oh, it's all these old-fashioned religious people, where, incidentally, they took all the basis of their morality for the rule-making in the first place from the Judeo-Christian tradition. So, this idea that there's kind of cool, right-on, coffee-sipping secularists just getting on with life, and a lot of fuddy-duddy, stupid old religious people foaming at the mouth is just nonsense. And actually humanists and secularists like Bob get in a frightful muddle about that, because they think the rule making is done by the church, when in fact actually that's the secular state's responsibility, and that's where it resides in the judiciary. And incidentally, they got all the basis for on which they made those rules from the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Yeah, well, let me just let me give Bob a chance to respond to that, because I mean there is. I mean, this may or may not be true of your particular stance, but there is a kind of militant atheism in the society these days, often directed at Muslims more than at Christians, to be fair, which is at least as prescriptive, and I mean, they're taking out adverts on the sides of buses in London, which is as prescriptive as some religions.
Well, just to come back to this point about, I mean, I didn't say that there was this stark contrast between secular liberal society and religion. I said that one of the explanations for the sort of turn away from religion is because some of the particular type of moralizing rules we've become disenchanted with as a country, and that there are certain trends that sort of have moved some people away from that. So I wasn't saying it was a big contrast. I was just saying that
who
for some
rules
people,
and regulations, Bob?
Well, we have a democratic process. And
yes, absolutely. And enshrined in that democratic process is the judiciary, which then upholds the law, which is the secular side of things.
Just let me hang on, because I want to bring.
There are those very moralising rules that I think drove people away somewhat from religion, obviously. But again, I think there's some antipathy that's produced by the sort of notion of an atheist. And I reject this label, sort of militant atheist. I don't really know what it stands for. And you mean your example of militant atheism there is putting an advert on the side of a bus. I mean, and that's not very prescriptive.
Some of the people associated with
anything.
Dawkins and whatnot are in that category, aren't they?
There are different tones of voice in the debate, certainly.
And that's a pretty kind of militant one.
But a liberal secularist viewpoint is about an open society, and it's saying people should be able to be free to choose how they live and what they think.
Let me just put that point to the Sheikh here, because I mean, how do you feel about it? Because the Muslim religion obviously it has no connection with the British state. It is a disestablished church in that sense. Do you feel that perhaps it has more kind of moral authority, is perhaps more attractive for that reason? I mean, George was saying that perhaps his church might be, if it were disestablished. Do you feel that since yours is, it does have a greater attraction?
I think this is one for Christians to decide whether they want to continue with the established church or not. But I have argued in favour of the established church. I don't feel left out. I don't feel Muslims or Islam is being ignored. I think the bishops in the House are there to represent religious views within the country, indeed societal views.
Let me just reshape the question slightly, because what I'm trying to get at here is, let's imagine a situation, perhaps pretty hard to imagine, but perhaps where Muslim clerics started playing the kind of role in national political life and in the institutions of the sort of establishment institutions of the society. Do you think in a way that might diminish the sort of voluntary basis of belief that people might begin to gravitate towards the religion for the wrong reasons?
No, I think every section of our society must play a part in the political life of our country. Muslims have something to say about education, about health, about housing, about employment. Why not have a Muslim voice in that debate, as we should have a voice from all sections of our society? I think the human within all of us, regardless of which religious label we wear, calls on us to allow others the freedom to be who they want to be. And I don't think we need to be in competition for that shared space out there. It's big enough for everybody. I think it would be wrong for us as religious communities collectively to see the secularists or the atheists as a them and us kind of foe or enemy. I think the same has to be reciprocated from the non-religious belief side, where we can say, look, we have this space to share, and share we must. Of course, anybody who then goes outside of the parameters of the rules and regulations, which is part of our part of our legislative makeup that we have, rules and regulations that help our society to be organized and orderly. I think anybody out of that should not be tolerated, and they should face the consequences of that. But I think without rules and laws, wherever they come from, I don't have an issue of where the laws come from, Judeo-Christian, and I'm sure there's been an Islamic influence within the laws of our country as well. Wherever they come from, as long as they're good for society and they enable society to function in an orderly way, safeguarding religious freedoms, human rights, etc., I think those rules are good.
What do you think about it? I mean, you, in a way, you began this thread, so let's bring it back. I mean, I was at the funeral for Tony Benn, and as part of the sermon, it was said that when he was brought up, he was taught that there were the kings and the prophets, and that you always sided with the prophets against the kings, i.e. with the people against the power. And I guess your point was really that perhaps the church would be stronger if it were less associated with the power. Or am I putting words in your mouth?
Yes, you are. If I was bringing Christianity to this country now, if it was just arriving, I would not want it to be established in the way that it is. I do, however, see some really positive things about the established church. It does mean that we are not simply a gathered church in a place. It does mean that, as I described at the beginning, I have that responsibility for the whole of my parish, not just those who happen to be my congregation. And that is a consequence of the establishment of the church. What I really don't want is for the state and the Church of England to simply become interchangeable. I mean, the one bit of the debate about the marriage of gay and lesbian people in church, where I felt uncomfortable about the church being open to that, is the sense of being told by the government that this must be. I mean, I think the church, it must not be told by the government in any subject what it must do. And I think the nature of the Church of England, for me, both its strength and its weakness, typical wishy-washy there stuff, is that a lot of the time it will be seen as part of the status quo of things. But there are so many occasions throughout history where the Church has spoken out, where it has not kept step, where it's been prepared to take a very different line. And that prophetic line, indeed, that prophetic line sometimes is about being more traditional. It's not necessarily about being further ahead than society. Sometimes it's about not being willing to make too fast a step forward. And I think that's the nature of religion. It less about sticking to rules. It is about having a perspective that doesn't just end with either the state or with current fads, but enables some ability to subvert and to think freely. So in that sense, I feel very much an ally of the humanists, because I think that freedom is really vital. And for myself, I see the church as supporting and participating in that. I should say that in Tower Hamlets, in our Interfaith Forum, we have very few rules there. We don't have any rules particularly about membership, and we have a very active humanist member who is very good for us, because provides us with another perspective and prevents us from becoming too blinkered about organised religion too. So I don't see that there is an immediate hostility.
George, do you think that one of the things that's happening, is that a kind of parallel to the development of multicultural Britain is a kind of sense that among believers, that kind of interfaith dialogue, which Alan just referred to, is the kind of standard operating procedure?
Yes, I think we've wasted a lot of time and breath and life on interfaith discussions. That's not actually to suggest that I wouldn't like to go and have a very long conversation and learn as much as I can from Sheikh Ibrahim. But I think we've spent a lot of time kind of thinking that there was some sort of faith community, some sort of pan-faith community, and I think that's very dangerous, because then it starts to precisely to put us in this place between where there's the religious world and there's the secular world, and I think it's just far more integrated than that, and I think we can possibly be a little more relaxed about where we are and a little more pluralist about that. And so towards the end of this programme, I think we're all getting to a place where we're agreeing that we can live and let live. But I think there are some characteristics here that have got to that will never be settled. It'll always be an uneasy piece, and I think that's actually quite a productive thing, because it does. We've talked a lot about kind of there being rules or not too many rules, or religion doesn't have as many rules as secularists think. But I mean, speaking for my own faith is about rule breaking, and it's about turning the world upside down and seeing it in an entirely new and different way.
Okay, Bob, if you're right, and there's quite a lot of statistical evidence to make the point that there's a declining numbers of people involved in organised religion, isn't one of the places that any secularist should be is not treating the church as if it's still compulsory attendance, still allied to the state, still the force in the land that it was in Victorian, never mind about 17th or 18th century Britain? Shouldn't the position of secularists be that these people often, when it's faiths that aren't the Church of England, pilloried by the society, in certain cases for political purposes, as the Muslim faith has been recently, particularly demonised? Isn't the place anybody who's in favour of freedom and civil liberties to defend their right to practice their religion as they seek?
Yes, I mean, as I said, I think that those rights are intertwined and they're indivisible. Our right to freedom of expression, our right to freedom of thought, religion, belief, conscience, those those are rights that cannot be dropped or interchanged. I don't think that secularism is targeting an old version of religion. I mean, individual voices may sometimes attack older beliefs, but there are also current beliefs. There are going to be, there are dogmatists. There are people who are very much so conservative within the church, for example, that they made something like same-sex marriage this huge political issue, and it was political despite there not being a party, and it was a political influence. They made that a huge issue, even though most people in the church are way more liberal. There's lots of good research on how people in the pews, as it were, are well out of step with the rules of the church. So I don't think some of these secularist criticisms or atheist criticisms are completely out of place. I do think we still have issues. We still have state-funded faith schools where children are religiously instructed from a young age, that parents feel that in some cases it's the only church in their area. That's a problem for a secularist. But I also think, just to clarify, that when we're talking about secularism, we shouldn't be speaking about it as something oppositional to religion that is atheistic. There are religious secularists, and there should be, and they should embrace that element. That's the freedom of religion, open society part of it, and there's nothing about secularism that is.
Let me get to the last word from the Sheikh. Sheikh, do you think that in some ways this is a politicised debate, in the sense that because Muslims are in the spotlight politically, perhaps imagine if a rabbi had made similar points about Christianity and church attendance, this wouldn't have been news. It's because a Muslim made this point. Do you think it's a politicised debate in that sense?
I wonder. I hope that's not the case. I think any firm believers in a particular religion, if they find something unagreeable, should stand up and say something about it, regardless of where it's coming from.
OK, well, I'm going to have to stop you there, because that's all we've got time for in this episode of Analysis. But I'd like to thank my guests, and of course you at home, for watching. Do tune in for future discussions, and don't forget, you can follow us both on Twitter and at the Islam Current Affairs Facebook page. Until next time, goodbye.